So Dr. Narendra Jadhav sir, I must say, is a very versatile personality. He has outstanding contribution in the field of administration and governance. He is a parliamentarian, honorable member of Rajya Sabha, where he has greatly contributed towards data security and education policy, upon which we are going to hear from him very soon. He has been a member of Planning Commission, where he has made the lasting contribution to public policies. Because of his policies, because of his contribution, many policies they have been shaped up. He has been the member of National Advisory Council in UPA regime. He has been the Vice Chancellor of University of Pune. I must say that he had made several contributions to Pune University, but I distinctly remember one contribution is Earn and Learn scheme, which he has introduced, and because of which some of my friends who take the higher education. So I would like to take this opportunity to convey my thanks on behalf of my friends to sir. You have introduced such a wonderful scheme because of which they could learn. And to our interest, sir was the chief economist and principal advisor to Reserve Bank of India. He has worked on the monetary policy and he has many anecdotes to tell in the Reserve Bank of India. Particularly, I never get tired hearing from him about the monetary policy because it's my own subject. But what needs to be held in high regard, whether his scholarship or his contribution in administration and governance. So I would say that his scholarship is more bigger because as the Sanskrit saying says that Vidvatvancha Nrupatvancha Naivatulyam Kadachana Swadeshe Pujyate Raja Vidwan Sarvatra Pujyate. So I must say that sir has won the Commander of Order of the Academic Palms. It's the greatest civilian award given by the government of France. So as an administrator, he may be acclaimed, he may be rewarded in India, but as a scholar, he is internationally awarded, internationally acclaimed, and we are really grateful to have him as our mentor, as our teacher. Sir has won more than 67 national and international awards too. But I must say, when it comes to a scholarship, I must say that about Sir Nasti Dhimatam Avishayo Nama, that for a true scholar, there is no any subject which cannot come under his grip. So Sir is a very, comes with a very rare combination of academics, that to economics and literature. I must say that he has wrote the autobiography, which has got translated into many international and national languages. And for his Punjabi version, it has won prestigious Sahitya Akademi Award. And Sir has also published the translation of works of Ravindranath Tagore. So I would highly recommend all the students to read his autobiography. It is not only the inspiring, but also the masterpiece in literature, Marathi literature, as well as literature in other languages also. So with this, I should stop, and I really thank you, sir, for your guidance, and we would like to your guidance in coming times also. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Over to you, Anuradha ma'am.
Yes, thank you, sir. That was a very wonderful and apt introduction for him. Though words are less when we introduce him, but I think that will make enough to introduce him from our part. Next, I request everybody to keep your videos on so that all the panel members, so that we can have a group photograph and have a smile. When I say 1, 2, 3, maybe Haridas ma'am is the one who clicks pictures, because rest everybody doesn't have any idea for that. I request ma'am to help.
I'm the new photographer of MIT now.
Sorry ma'am to bother you with this, but can everybody?
Yeah.
Can everybody please keep your videos on? Yes.
Dr. Lata and Professor Gaurav Pitkar, I can see your video off. Here it goes. 3, 2, 1, and a smile on the face. Here is a photograph. Yeah, I have taken it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So the most awaited moment has come. Without any more taking any more time, I request Dr. Narendra Jadhav sir to enlighten us with his words of wisdom on the topic of new education policy. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you, Saurav, for a very generous introduction. I had gone out for a little while because I had to bring some papers from the next room. I don't know whether you mentioned that I have written 41 books on different subjects. You mentioned some of the books that I heard, but you'll be happy to know that my 42nd book is in the press now. And guess what is the subject of the 42nd book? It is the new education policy. I've been working on this book for the last 5 years, and it's going to come out in next 1 month. I will just show you the cover. This is the cover. Can you see the cover clearly?
Yes, sir, we can see that.
It is.
Yes, sir.
It is a book on education. The title is Future of the Indian Education System. How relevant is the new education policy? This is the subject of our talk today. This is the subject of this book, which is expected to come out in about 4 weeks' time from now. This is the cover of that book. So today, and I have tried to write books on a very wide range of subjects. Economics is, of course, there. That's my basic discipline. But I have written on sociology, I have written literature, I have written on education, I have written on technology, and on politics I'm writing right now, which will be coming out very soon. So coming to the subject of today, my talk today is going to be divided into 3 parts. First part is I'm going to talk about how education policies have evolved in our country. It's very important to give a perspective on education policy itself, how it has evolved in our country. That's the first part. Second part is the basic of the basic source of reference for the latest policy. That is Dr. Kasturirangan's report, which was published 2019, and it was called Draft National Education Policy. And now, on 29th July, that is last month, we have the National Education Policy 2020. So, first part, I'll talk about the evolution of the education policies in India. Then, secondly, I will talk about the content of the Draft National Education Policy 2019, and then talk about National Education Policy of 2020, and then at the end, I will talk about both. You know, while talking about these two, I will talk about the positive features, negative features, both, because I want to give you a balanced presentation about where do things stand. So starting with the evolution of national policy on education, you know, we started thinking about our top leaders, the founding fathers, started talking about new education policy from day one. After we became independent in 1947, you'll be surprised that in January 1948, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister, said that the entire basis of education must be revolutionized. That we are a new country and we have to change the system of education in conformity with national aspirations. We have to recognize that. That's the first one. And the concrete first effort was made in 1948. There was the University Education Commission appointed. That was only for universities. University Education Commission of 1948. And the chairman was Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. And he was the one, that report recommended establishment of UGC. We are all familiar with UGC. And they also recommended the 10+2 structure for the school. What happened was, when India became a republic in 1950, Constitution of India made education as a state subject. Now that created a problem. Education was a state subject, So primarily states were supposed to be involved and center only with a margin. Later on it changed. It is very interesting that the directive principles of state policy actually stated that there should be free education and compulsory education for all children in the age group of 6 to 14. That became the RTE Act 16 years later in 2010, but it was stated in 1950. The next commission that came was for secondary education. This was Mudaliar was the chairman of this commission, and they changed the pattern from 12 years of school education to 11 years of school education, 11th standard, and they transferred the secondary school examination from earlier they used to be conducted by the university, some university. Now from then onwards they were transferred to the state created education boards like secondary school education board that we have in Maharashtra. But the first truly national education policy came in 1968, and the basis of that was the Kothari Commission report. Kothari Commission report is the most magnificent document that was created in 1968, and secretary to this committee was Mr. J.P. Naik. He was, if there was one Shikshan Maharshi in our country, it was really J.P. Naik. And J.P. Naik, operating from Pune at that time, he was the one who contributed a lot. Therefore, in Mumbai University, you will find that one big building is dedicated as J.P. Naik Bhavan. That is the reason for that. So what happened was, they wrote a report, and that report was phenomenal, and that report was really the first truly national education policy came out of that report. Very detailed report, and curiously, very interesting, that although it was a state subject, education was a state subject, on public demand, the report was discussed in the both houses of parliament, and then central government came out with a policy. So state subject was debated, state subject, not a concurrently subject. State subject was debated in the parliament in both houses, and first ever national education policy came into being, and that laid the foundation. Now, it was really a policy which focused on inclusiveness and equal access to educational opportunities, and they evolved this formula of 10 plus 2 plus 3. 10 years of school education plus 2 years of higher secondary and 3 years of college education. This was the formula that came out from there. The next thing that was going to happen was, nothing happened for a long time, and lot of people, successive governments went on diluting the provisions of the Kothari Commission report. For example, one of their recommendations, which is still talked about, is the most phenomenal one, that government, central government and states together must spend 6% of GDP, I mean amount equivalent to 6% of GDP must be spent on education sector by the central government and the state governments. This is a phenomenal recommendation. We have still not achieved it, and we're going to talk about that. So what happened was, it was after the first education policy was announced, 1968, 20 years later, in 1986, there was a new national education policy, and this policy, that was the policy which brought out the formula of 10 plus 2 plus 3, and 1986 one was that they also recommended establishment of, we all know, AICTE, that is All India Council of Technical Education, and National Council for Teachers Education, and NAC, that we are all familiar with, that is the National Assessment and Accreditation Council of our country. Also, they established the academic staff colleges across the universities for refreshing and reorienting the knowledge of the university and college teachers. After 86 policy, there was not much change, but when there was this education policy, while it was being implemented, the Rajiv Gandhi government collapsed and VP Singh government took over. So VP Singh government appointed a review committee, and they reviewed. Their review was published in 1990. After that, that government was also toppled, and another government came. That also came down, and Narasimha Rao became the prime minister in 1991. When that happened, they restored the policy again. The National Education Policy of 86 was restored by them, and they issued what was called Revised Program of Action of 1992. 1986 is the last time national policy was written, and 34 years after that, now in 2020, we have a new policy. But let me also mention in passing that this revised program of action of 1992, that was the program which introduced the famous midday meal scheme, and when BJP government came in, they introduced some more reforms called National Agenda for Governance in Education, and they talked about universalized Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. That was launched in 2000-2001, but then after Congress government again went down, and when BJP government went down, again the Congress-led UPA government took over in 2004, and they made major reforms. Two reforms are very important. They appointed the National Knowledge Commission under the chairmanship of Sam Pitroda, and there were a series of reports by them. And the National Knowledge Commission, and I was associated with part of that, that led to a massive expansion of higher education was recommended, and the entire ecosystem of vocational education was also supposed to be changed. However, politics came in, and what happened was, within Congress party, there was a lot of politics, and the education minister at that time, Mr. Arjun Singh, and I met Arjun Singh for the first time at MIT when he was invited. The HRD minister, he did not like Sam Pitroda and the Knowledge Commission's report, so he ignored all of them excepting the massive expansion part of it. And he appointed new committee under the chairmanship of Professor Yashpal. Now, this was a very, very important committee, and they examined the National Knowledge Commission, and they came up with a very, very good report, including recommending the right to education. Actually, the right to education bill was first time suggested by National Front government under Deve Gowda. But before they could do anything, that government collapsed. But finally, the UPA, Congress-led UPA government in 2009 took up under the HRD minister Kapil Sibal. That was the time when I entered Planning Commission, and I was in charge of the education part, among other things. So I was the counterpart of Kapil Sibal in Planning Commission, and we were jointly together. We were together and quite harmoniously, I must say. And the right to education bill came out, and it became a fundamental right in 21 in the Constitution 21A, Article 21A, and that was done during that period, the Right to Education Act, and it became operational on 1st April 2010. And many of the recommendations, Kapil Sibal had no difficulty with the recommendations of the National Knowledge Commission, and many of them were recommended and implemented. I am very happy to tell you that it was during that period that the biggest scheme of higher education for state universities, That was introduced, and I'm one of the principal father of that scheme. That scheme is called RUSA, Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan. This was for all the state universities, because my contention has always been, even as a vice chancellor, I used to emphasize that the mainstay of higher education in India is state universities. If you look at the totality of number of students, it is the state universities which have the maximum number of students. Private universities have very little share in comparison with the overwhelming share of the state universities, and therefore there has to be a special attention given to them, and a massive financing scheme was chalked out. I fought it out with a lot of people there at the time, and finally the RUSA came out, Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan. When that government changed and the new government came in, BJP government came in under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, they started with the whole thing, and they changed names of many things. What they did was, one of the things that was done is that you will see that they never talk about RUSA. RUSA is a huge scheme in higher education. What they have done is Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan is for school education, and RUSA is for college and higher education, right? Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan. They combined the two under the leadership of Javadekar as the education MHRD minister, and it's called Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. So they wanted to avoid the old terms used, RUSA, that remind people of the old government. So schemes were same, but they were given a new nomenclature. And when Modi government came to power in 2014, they started seriously thinking about policies, and they started with the grassroots consultations. And in 2016, the education minister at that time, MHRD minister at that time, Prakash Javadekar, came up with some inputs for draft National Education Policy 2016. It was put out in the public. It was discussed and debated in the parliament, and when it was put out, comments from literally lakhs of people were received. Earlier also, grassroots consultations were conducted in more than 2.5 lakh villages of our country. You can go to MHRD website and you will find how that massive consultation was done. And then that consultation, it was crystallized into the draft National Education Policy, some inputs. And then there was another committee appointed, committee after committee. This was T. Subramaniam Committee, TR Subramaniam Committee, that time retired cabinet secretary. And he and his team analyzed all those suggestions and came out with a report. But most importantly, in 2017, the Modi government appointed Kasturirangan committee, and this committee was to analyze all the recommendations and put together a policy, a draft policy. And they thought that it would be over by 6 months. By the way, Kasturirangan was working with me as the Member Planning Commission when we were there. I was looking after education, he was looking after science and technology. So he was the one who was given this task because I was already in the parliament. So he was given that task, and what a phenomenal job that he has done along with his colleagues. And they came out with a report. That report took 2 years, but it's worth it. In 2019, the report was released. It's a huge report, very bulky report. I think it is 446 pages, magazine size. So it is a huge report that came out and became public in July 2019. And they called it Draft National Education Policy. The word policy was actually wrong. It was only Kasturirangan Committee's report. Policy is not decided by private individuals like that. Policy is decided by the government. So the expression that Draft National Education Policy 2019 was actually wrong. and that was proven wrong. What government did was, on 29 July 2020, that is last month end, they came out with National Education Policy 2020. Now, bulk of the National Education Policy of 2020 is based on 2019 report of Kasturirangan Committee, and we will see what it contains. While Kasturirangan Committee is a huge tome, National Education Policy 2020 is slick, it's precise, and it's not more than 60 pages. So it's an abbreviated, short, sharp version of government's thinking, and that was released in July 2020. Let me now talk about what are the essential features. First, I will talk about the essential features of the so-called Draft National Education Policy of 2019, because that is the basis of the new policy. Then I will talk about what are the changes made between 2019 draft policy and 2020 final policy. So let's talk about Kasturirangan report. I'm going to focus on the major issues. You know, I cannot take care of everything because it's a huge report. First, very important thing is that they have given a lot of importance to what is called early child care and early childhood care and education. So that is ECCE. Preschool education has been recommended. So now the education starts, and that has been accepted by 2020 policy. Education will now start from the age of 3. And what they have done is that they have pedagogical structure that they have given has 4 stages. Foundational stage, which is age group of 3 to 8, and it will cover 3 years of preschooling and grade 1 and grade 2. That is put together as the foundational stage. Then there is a preparatory stage. The preparatory stage is between age group of 8 to 11, where the grades are grade 3 and grade 4. And then the third one is middle phase, which is for age group between 11 to 14, and it will have grades 6, 7, and 8. And then there would be 4th and final stage of school education, which is secondary stage, no higher secondary business, only one phase, secondary phase, which will go on from the age of 14 to 18, and it will cover grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. So the school education now is for the age group between 3 to 18, and grades would be up to 12th standard, from preschool education to 12th standard. This is the structure that they have proposed, which is completely different from the structure which was there earlier. I have, frankly, very serious misgivings about this structure, because nowhere in the world, grade 1 and grade 2 is combined. What is great part of this is formally integrating preschool education into the mainstream. This is wonderful, and kudos to the government for finally doing it. That preschool has become part of the education system, mainstream. Now, but this combination of preschool with grade 1 and grade 2 is something which defies logic. It has no logical reason whatsoever, and nowhere in the world primary education is divided partly, grade 1 and grade 2 with preschool education. We are the only one, and I do not think there is a big justification for that. But introducing preschool education as a integral part of education is a wonderful idea. It is also a very, very good thing that free and compulsory education would now start from preschool up to higher secondary. That means from the age of 3 to age of 18, there would be free and compulsory school education, and therefore the Right to Education Act would be revised accordingly. MDM scheme, that is the midday meal scheme, will also now serve breakfast in addition to the lunch. Midday meal, in addition to midday meal, it will also serve healthy breakfast. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing. There is a provision, however, which I do not like at all, and that is that they're talking about revising the right to education. Comprehensive review has been recommended, especially the mandates and obligations in accordance with the ground realities and needs. I'm quoting from the report. This is nonsense, because as I mentioned earlier, you know where they are going. They are trying to take away the earmarking. There is a provision earmarking 25% of seats in private schools for the disadvantaged children, and this is a very important provision which has not been implemented properly even so far. Please understand this. 1950, the directive principle stated the free and compulsory education from 6 to 14. It took us 60 years to come up with an act, the Right to Education Act, which became operational on 1st April 2010. We are now in 2020, and in the 10 years, it has not been adequately implemented in letter and spirit. And here comes Kasturirangan Committee, which says you dilute that further. Review, under the guise of review, they are talking about diluting, which I think was a very retrograde step. Fortunately, the policy of 2020 has denounced it, at least not stated it. So that's a good part. Then moving to the secondary education, they have put the GER target, that is the gross enrollment ratio target of 100% by 2030. Extremely, very, very good idea that there would be universal education by the year 2030. So secondary education GER target would be 100% by 2030. Then there is a semester system proposed, and the focus will be on development of core capacities and life skills. Life skills would be introduced, and vocational education would start early on and would be compulsory part of the school education, which is very, very good. Then there are recommendations about teachers' education. Particularly, we'll come to that a little later, but higher education. Wonderful suggestions are made in higher education also, revolutionary really. It says that the higher education GER, that is the gross enrollment ratio target, should be 50% by the time 2035. So in next 15 years, today the GER is about 26%, which means that in the proper age group for higher education, today only 26% students get 26% boys and girls get an opportunity to enroll into college or university, access college or university education. That is very low. The world average is around 30, and we are at 26 or thereabout. Now we have placed the target of 50% in the next 15 years, and this is not an overly ambitious target. China has already crossed it, and as I was saying, the world average is about 29-30, and we are below the average. So we will catch up with the world, because in 15 years the world average itself might become 50 or 55. So massive efforts will be required there, and but what is important is that here the report is talking about revamping the entire education system, higher education system, and there would be three kinds of universities. Please understand, this is very important. I will refer to this I will straight away go to the 2020 precisely about this. You know, for higher education, all higher education institutions will be converted into large multidisciplinary universities or colleges. So there would not be every higher education institution must be either autonomous college or it must be a multidisciplinary university. And even autonomous college would be multidisciplinary. Unitary kind of disciplinary things are gone. University means universality of subjects to be discussed. And that's why, true to the spirit, they have made every higher educational institution over the next 15 years would be made into a multidisciplinary entity, either as an autonomous college or a university. And what they are talking about is that there would be three different kinds of higher educational institutions. One would be, or academic institutions, autonomous degree colleges would also be part of that. But universities, there will be three kinds. One would be focused on research and teaching in an equal manner. And to other extreme, there would be those universities which are only on teaching. Again, I will comment on that, but this is a very unnatural classification in my opinion. So three types that they are talking about is that there would be world-class universities which are focused primarily on research and then little bit of teaching. Then there would be second category where focus would be, say, equal focus on both research as well as teaching. And third would be typically only education, only teaching kind of universities. This is an unnatural classification, but what I like is the multidisciplinary part of it, but I do not like this classification per se, because there can be a lot of good research that can come out of teaching universities. The research should not be, research and teaching cannot be bifurcated at all. I have known that to be a good researcher, you have to be a good teacher also. A good teacher is always a good researcher. So, these are overlapping, intertwined kind of things. And therefore, separating them only as research and only as teaching is something that does not appeal to me at all. But very important recommendation that has been made in the report and has been accepted in the 2020 report is that 20 policy says that wherever possible, the medium of instruction at least until grade 5, but preferably till grade 8 and beyond, will be the home language or mother tongue or local language or regional language. Now, this is something which has been, and this would be followed by both public and private schools. This is very, very important that everywhere it would be applicable. So, no such thing as English medium education from beginning. No. Up to 5, all schools, public and private, will have mother tongue wherever possible, they say. KYCs would probably be avoided because they have transferable employees and so on. But let's not keep the mainstream would be mother tongue would be medium of instruction at least up to grade 5. Now, this is a very, very good suggestion, and the focus on mother tongue as a medium of instruction is most welcome, and it applies to both public and private schools. It is even more welcome because it would certainly reduce the chasm, the divide, and elitism which you see right now, in the schooling system that we have. So it would act, mother tongue as a medium of instruction would act as a harmonizer, taking care of this, and that's why it would be good. The policy also says that the 3-language formula would continue, and it would continue to help promote national integration, which is a good idea. Second, entirely new thing that has come in 2020 policy is that National Assessment Center. So there would be a National Assessment Center to make assessment and evaluation of school education more holistic. And this National Assessment Center has been given a fantastic name. You know, one thing good about this government is they come up with wonderful acronyms. The acronym for that is PARAKH, 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 because they are talking about evaluation. PARAKH is Performance Assessment, Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. That is PARAKH. So performance assessment, review and analysis of knowledge for holistic development. And this PARAKH would act as a standard setting body under the MHRD, and its basic objectives would be to set the norms, standards and guidelines for student assessment and evaluation of all the recognized school boards of India. This is an exceedingly important and desirable new addition that has been made in the National Education Policy 2020. But the best addition that has been made in this policy, according to me, as far as the higher education is concerned, is that it specifies that by 2030, there would be at least one large multidisciplinary higher education institution, that is either a university or an autonomous college in or near every district. And this is original really. Now there would be in a college education, there would be multiple entry and exit. If somebody leaves after 1 year, he or she gets a certificate. If he or she leaves after successful completion of 2 years in a degree program, they get a diploma. And those who stay for 3 years or 4 years, depending on the duration of the program. Graduation program can be 3 years or can be 4 years. That flexibility is there. So those who complete 3 or 4 years, they get degrees. So this is a wonderful thing. Even more wonderful thing is something which I have been talking ad nauseum from my days as a Vice Chancellor. This blessed artificial distinction between art, science, commerce and vocational education will be gone forever. Once for all, that will be gone. So earlier, present system, if you go on an arts track and you don't like it, you have to come back and start again from the beginning in the science track or whatever. Why? It should be possible to move, these silos, this compartmentalization between arts and science and commerce is entirely artificial. And no country in the world has it today, excepting our country. And this was a British tradition. They gave up long time back, but we are still clinging to that. And I have been saying this when I was a Vice Chancellor. What is this distinction? This should be done away with as early as possible. Now that is going to happen. How soon that happens, I don't know. But what will happen is that you can take any course from any educational institution, any higher educational institution. You are registered in one educational institution, but you can take course from anywhere, and the credit that you will earn, that will be kept in a digital store called Academic Bank of Credit. So you have credit bank. This is not a bank credit in the financial sense. The credits that you accumulate will be put together in a digital register maintained by the Academic Bank of Credit, and which would mean that they would be transferable between the institutions. So you can be part of World Peace University, but you could be taking a course of some other educational institutions and transfer the credit to your Academic Bank Credit. And when you earn enough credit as defined by that institution, then you will get a proper degree or certificate or diploma or degree. So this is a wonderful addition. This was something which was much needed and long awaited thing that has happened, finally happened. And I commend the government for this major reform that has come out. Now, second set of questions that I want to raise is about the proposals of Kasturirangan report, which are modified or diluted in the 2020 policy. There, first thing that comes to mind is review of the Right to Education Act. Fortunately, in the final policy, I was telling you that the attempt was to do away with the 25% reservation for the disadvantaged class students in private schools compulsorily. Now that was Kasturirangan committee tried to do away with that in the name of conducting a comprehensive review. That does not find mention in the final policy that has come. Does that mean they have given up on that? Possibly or hopefully that is the case, but one doesn't know. At least it is not there in the final policy that has come up. So that's a positive one. Another thing is a little bit tricky one. They are going to have National Education Commission. Now, this was a recommendation made earlier also by 2019 Kasturirangan report, that at the national level there would be a National Education Commission, and different activities of the commission would have a separate regulator for that, and all other regulators would be combined into only one regulator. We talked about that a little bit. Wait a minute. Yeah. Yeah. So earlier there was the provision for National Higher Education Commission. National Education Commission. That will be the supreme body which will take care of everything about education from the age of 3 to age of 18 in the high school and the college education and the university education and post-university education. So this National Education Commission, originally the provision was there would be one at the top, which would be headed probably by the Prime Minister himself. And there would be a corresponding state-level education commission. Now, in the final policy, that is gone. What they have done is that National Education Commission is retained. That's a great idea. National Education Commission would be retained, but the state-level commission will no longer be there, which means that the Department of School and College of Higher Education at the state level will be the apex body at the state level. There would not be any state level education commission. Now this is very, very tricky, because many states are going to raise flag against this, because they would see this as a centralization of education. They will see this as going against the precepts of fiscal federalism, and state education is basically a state subject, or originally it was a state subject. So taking all the powers to Central National Education Commission is something that may be resented by states. That is why what the policy has recommended, that there is something called CABE, that is Central Advisory Board of Education. I used to be a member of that too. Central Advisory Board of Education, CABE. That CABE is good. That is where all the state education ministers also participate. So for getting the feedback from the states, they are now strengthening. Proposal is to strengthen CABE, the Central Advisory Board of Education. That would be strengthened. Now, how far this would appease the states and dilute their resentment remains to be seen. But this is something which is going to be challenged by many states, particularly those in South. Now, this National Education Commission is a permanent body which would be headed most probably by the Prime Minister, and 4 different activities are there for 4 different entities would be there, all reporting to National Education Commission. For example, UGC will be converted into higher education grant kind of agency. So University Grant Commission would be one of those 4 entities. Small one, not very powerful at all, but it would be basically grant giving agency would serve the limited purpose of that. Then there is for accreditation, there is for that activity there would be a national framework again reporting to the National Education Commission. Then the third one, most important one, is the regulatory body. Now, as you know, probably know, there are 15 regulators in our country. Do you know that? UGC is one, AICTE is another. For teachers' education, there is a 3rd regulator. For law, there is a 4th regulator. For architect, there is another regulator. So we have 15 regulators, and previous government tried very hard, and I was part of that committee to collapse all the regulators together into one regulator. There is every regulator has become an institution by itself, and the interconnectivity is simply not there. So the idea was to cut out all those and make only one super regulator. Now that idea has come back again and is part of the new policy. This would also be reporting, of course, to National Education Commission. But this is a very important one. But 2 sectors have been left out of these regulators, medical one and law one. Other than medical and law, all other regulators would be combined into one super regulator. So all that would make National Education Commission the most powerful, omnipresent body for overseeing the entire education spectrum in our country. But at the state level, there would be no Education Commission, as was recommended by Kasturirangan. Instead, the State Department of Education will play the apex role as far as the states are concerned. Finally, then one more thing which has been diluted, and this I say with heavy heart. All the commissions that I talked about, they have all emphasized what Kothari Commission has pointed out, that 6% of our government expenditure will be on 6% of GDP. Government expenditure on education would be equivalent to 6% of GDP. The government there means central government and state government. Do you know where we are now? After how many years? 1968 onwards to 2020, 52 years, and we are still little more than 4% of GDP. So what has happened is, in spite of all the tall talk by our leaders of all parties and all governments, we have actually not been spending enough on education. We are at something like 4.2% of our GDP now, so 6% is a long way to go. One. Second, the Kasturirangan Committee had not only reiterated the goal of 6%, but they said that government expenditure on education as a ratio of total expenditure, these two are different things. First one was as a ratio of GDP, but they came out with this gem that government expenditure on education as a part of total government expenditure, which is currently around 10%, would be doubled to 20% of total expenditure. I'll say this again. Don't mix this with GDP and don't mix it with the 6%. GDP was 6% target for expenditure to GDP ratio. Here we are talking about education expenditure as a ratio of total expenditure, which is presently around 10%. The Kasturirangan committee said that this should be doubled in 10 years to about 20% per year, 20% of education expenditure. This was very, very good, and that would have taken faster towards the ultimate goal of at least attaining 6%. Unfortunately, and I say this with heavy heart, that in the final policy that has come out, they have reaffirmed, remember, they have reaffirmed the goal of 6%. Again, the same thing, as soon as possible, but they have deleted the provision which was there in the Kasturirangan committee report to double the education expenditure as a ratio of total expenditure from 10% to 20%. That has been quietly buried, and I do not think it is a very positive development. So that is another thing. This is a retrograde step in my opinion. Now I come to the final point. In spite of the two policies, the national so-called draft National Education Policy of 2019, that is Kasturirangan Committee report, and the National Education Policy of 2020, which has just come. In spite of the two policies, what is there which is still missing? In spite of such mammoth effort, what is still missing? Two things in my opinion. First, the so-called out-of-school children. We have been talking about universalization of education, very laudable, very noble indeed. Now, how many out-of-school children do we have? They have given some numbers which are gross underestimates. Many people, responsible agencies have estimated, and my own estimate is that there are 80 million out-of-school children. Are they? The report assumes that they are all dropouts. No, sir. They are not all dropouts. 44 million out of those 80 million have never gone to any school. I repeat, out of 80 million children, which are so-called OOSC, that is out of school children. Out of 80 million, which is staggering, 44 million have never ever gone to a school, and the remaining 36%, 36 million people, students, they were once upon a time in the school and they are now out. Now, this is where the absence of analytical foundation comes into the picture. We don't have the correct numbers and we don't have a mechanism. How do we go from this to universalization of school education? There is absolutely nothing excepting a cursory statement that we will do, our top priority would be to get all these out-of-school children in the education fold as soon as possible. That's it. They do not give any strategy, they do not give any action plan, so which means, again, this becomes a lofty intention without strategic policy or strategic plan. To me, it becomes only a lofty kind of intention. The final point is, the final 2 points is that I was expecting that in the final policy, they will move towards what is called Education 4.0. As you recall, I've written a book on Industrial Revolution 4.0, and everything is moving in terms of 4.0. Banks 4.0, finance 4.0. The education needs to move to 4.0. The policy does talk about artificial intelligence, design thinking, holistic health, organic living, environmental education, global citizenship education, and so on. This is good, but not good enough. I do not see any reference to bring in the entire range of new age technology, which involves artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, robotics, blockchain technology, additive manufacturing, Internet of Things, and all that, that needs to become part of our school curriculum. It has to become part of our school curriculum, but there is no mention of that, and I regret that that is still left out. It should have been there. In fact, in Kasturirangan's report, data analytics has not even spelled properly. It has been written as data analysis rather than data analytics. That shows it's not only typographical error, it shows the ignorance of those who have drafted that report. So that is something that remains to be done. Finally, the policy vision is beautifully drafted. The vision for the National Education Policy 2020 is beautifully drafted. Among other things, it talks about, and I quote, our institutions must develop among students a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties and constitution values, bonding with one's country, and a conscious awareness of one's roles and responsibilities in a changing world. Beautiful. Very, very good. Very well said. Okay, what is your plan of doing that? No, there is no plan. There is no action plan of how are you going to do that. I would have imagined, and I have been saying this very often, and I have brought it to the notice of everybody who matters, that one way of actually inculcating the constitutional values and fundamental duties and to create conscientious citizens of this country, one of the things that could be done, a very easy way to do, is that constitution and civics should become part of the high school curricula. It should be a compulsory subject. You know, we used to have a subject called civics once upon a time. It was for 20 marks or so, and then gradually, first it was with the history and geography, and then it got lost somewhere. There should be a full-fledged paper subject of constitution and civics. Today it is needed more than ever before, and this should be a compulsory subject at the secondary school end. Last year, compulsory subject, and with the due importance. That is one way of inculcating the constitutional values, the knowledge about the fundamental rights, and also the fundamental duties. But that has not been done. So, in sum, let me conclude now. In sum, the new education policy 2020 has a great potential to be a critical turning point, a massive game changer in completely transforming the education ecosystem in India towards the world class, and in the process lay foundation of new India of 21st century, as said by the Honorable Prime Minister. This can happen provided that, what are the conditions? There are 5 conditions under which it can happen. First, the omnibus framework presented in the policy should be fine-tuned further, hopefully on the lines which I have suggested. 2, a detailed time-bound program of action must be prepared. Third, government, which includes both center and states, they should make concerted efforts to raise public expenditure on education as a percentage of country's GDP to 6% as early as possible. So there should be a concerted effort to do that. Fourth, you know, one of the tricky things that has happened in 2019 policy as well as in 2020 policy is that they talk about private sector, control of private sector institutions such as World Peace University that we are talking about, with light but tight regulation. Okay, that sounds very good. But this whole thing will succeed only if the private sector responds positively to light but tight regulations and makes honest self-disclosure of all aspects of their educational operations. So, this is a very big assumption that this policy has made, that regulation would be tight, but it would be light. And we would rely more on honest self-disclosure by all the educational institutions, all the universities in the private sector. And last several years, governments after government have tried their best to bring in transparency there, but to no avail. And therefore, success of this policy in a large measure also depends on the private sector responding positively to light but tight regulations and makes honest self-disclosure of all aspects of their educational operations. Now, this is really too much to ask for going by the past experience, but who knows, future could be different. And finally, fifth and the final item is that the central government and all states should effectively collaborate, going beyond the political party lines, on the meticulous and effective implementation of the new Education Policy 2020. Our future depends on that, literally. Our future indeed depends on that. That is where I would like to stop my presentation and want to take few questions if you like, but I'm already exhausted. It's 1 hour and 15 minutes, so I'll take few questions. So there were some questions which are coming, but I could not read them. So can somebody question okay, all right. So how do we go about it?
Haridas ma'am, because the time is almost up and you are also exhausted, sir. Maybe we'll take one odd question, because most of the questions that were asked you already covered in your address, sir. So I'll just take 1 or 2 questions, sir.
Yeah, sure.
Sir, the new education policy lacks focus on children with special needs. How can this be addressed?
Sorry, say that again.
Sir, the new education policy lacks on the special needs children. Focus on children with special needs. So how can this be addressed? Is one question.
No, it needs to be addressed, but that would be part of the overall thing. It needs to be addressed. I'm not gone through all the nitty-gritties in my lecture, but there are some provisions made, but they need to be beefed up. I have focused on so-called mota things, the major things. But there is this special children and their special needs children. They need to be attended to, and in a financially significant manner. If we don't do that, the objective is to have all-inclusive education system. The system would not be educationally inclusive if we do not take care of all the disadvantaged strata, including the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, OBCs, and economically backwards, and those who are physically challenged, Divyanga, and so on. So all the special disadvantaged sectors must be given their due in this policy. But all that, intentions are all there in the policy, but until you raise the level of education substantially, that is not going to be possible, and that would remain as a lofty, noble intention and not more than that.
Okay. So just one more question which was not answered in your address. What is your opinion about the training of universities, like bringing international universities to India?
No, I'm all for it. international institutions must come. In fact, I'm just tempted to tell you. Actually, there were, when I was a member of Planning Commission and when I was in charge of education, as I mentioned, a lot of bills were pending in the Parliament. 5 major bills. One was National Commission on Higher Education and Research, and then there was the Foreign Universities Bill, and then there were 3 others about accreditation and so on. All that has come now as a part of this policy. So at that time, there was a talk about the foreign universities. Okay, let me narrate that incident without taking any name. Okay, one day I was sitting in my office, and a famous educationist of Maharashtra, not living anymore, he barged into my room, and in Marathi he started saying, "Arey, kai chalole kai tumhi? What are you guys doing?" So I said, "Aap baith jaiye." I was speaking to him in Marathi. That part I can disclose that he was a Maharashtrian or Marathi speaking person. "Kai chalole kai tumhi?" मी म्हटलं, "तुम्ही बसा जरा चहा घ्या. काय तुमच्या मनात आहे? What are you saying?" So he said, "काय तुम्ही परदेशी विद्यार्थ्यांना आता परदेशी विद्यापीठांना तुम्ही येऊ देणार आहात, मग आपल्या विद्यार्थ्यांनी जायचं कुठे? तुम्ही परदेशी विद्यापीठ इकडे आणल्यानंतर आपल्या मुलांनी जायचं कुठे?" तर म्हटलं, "कुठल्या विद्यार्थ्यांबद्दल बोलताय तुम्ही सर? ज्यांच्याकडनं तुम्ही 1 कोटी रुपये वगैरे देणगी घेतलं त्या विद्यार्थ्यांबद्दल बोलताय का तुम्ही? त्यांनी कुठे जायचं?" He got up and without taking tea, he left the room. So, let's forget about the hypocrisy that we have. We have to, if we want to stand in a global competition, we must make ourselves strong enough to compete with the global institutions which will come in. And they must be encouraged to come in. That is the only way. There is no other way. I'm completely convinced that that has got to be done, and sooner or later, it is bound to happen. I wish it happens sooner rather than later. Thank you.